Welcome to the Penguin Podcast, brought to you by Penguin Facilities Management.
So just scrolling back to very early in our conversation, Lee, we talked about, obviously, where does fire doors and passive measures such as active systems like alarms, sprinklers, where does fire doors sit in as level of importance to them active systems? Because a client will always ensure that the fire alarm is tested on a weekly basis. It's tested 6 monthly, 50% at a time, or in full, annually. The sprinkler system will be serviced regularly. The fire extinguishers will be serviced regularly. Where does fire doors and where should fire doors sit in that level of compliance?
So it's a brilliant question and really easy. They're in the same place, aren't they, in law, Article 17, maintaining your fire safety provisions in your building.
Yeah.
It doesn't, there isn't a difference between passive and active, because when we look at things like alarms, so let's say an alarm system, it alerts you to the fire. It doesn't stop it spreading, though, does it?
Yeah,
does
exactly.
it? When we look, and I think this is the common misconception. We look at a door as a door. Well, are you looking at it as a life safety device? Would we let the caretaker start messing around with the fire alarm or the sprinkler system? We wouldn't, would we? Why are we letting them mess around with the door?
Yeah.
Because that's what's going to stop them. We look at doors. We're even worse with walls, fire stopping.
Yeah.
How are we looking in the voids? Can a fire just spread through the building? It'll miss the door. I go to lots of properties where they're doing, great things with the doors. They're looking at maintenance around the doors. Pop your head above the suspended ceiling and there's a hole above there. It's going to do absolutely nothing, because there has always been a system of maintenance, as you rightly say, for the alarms, for the sprinklers. There has to be one for all of your provisions.
Yeah.
And it has to be suitable. So they allow, an alarm engineer might say, yeah, we need to check that, or the risk assessor might say we need to check that. But, without all of the holistic parts to the passive, active, and your controls that you've put in place, how you're getting out the building, it doesn't work, does it? It doesn't work with a single item or a couple of items. It works in the holistic, and this is why the importance of it all has to go through the risk assessor. You need to make sure you've got a competent risk assessor what will look at all of it and give you the most practicable solution to compliance.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree with that. So for organisations and responsible people out there that are trying to get their house in order,
Yeah.
we've had multiple years now of first round of inspections. Yeah, we've had first round of remedials. A lot of people have been overcharged, missold,
Yeah.
all these areas. I want to just narrow it down to the first steps that these people now need to take to get their house in order. So in a very brief way, 3 steps of how our clients, building managers, end users start. What are their practical steps to get their house in order?
So I would say the first step, if you haven't got anyone within your business, the responsible person's business, who can put a pathway through, you need to engage. Now, that might be an FM company, what can do that, can prove the competence, or it might be your risk assessor. But you need someone as a safety and assistance, Article 18, who can take you through that pathway. If it's an FM company, I would then say a real good risk assessor. A real good risk assessor, has the level, is of an intermediate or advanced level, going against understanding the building, because it's complexity of building, isn't it? If you've got a very simple building or you've got a complex building, you will need different. But getting that person as the risk assessor at the very heart of what you're doing, you will never get a practicable system of maintenance.
The orchestrator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then competence, making sure people engage in competence. So many people believe that they can engage. There's no such thing as a competent company in law. It's the competent person. So engage in a company saying these have got Trada or Firehouse, or it's irrelevant, because it's not what legal compliance requires. It requires you to evidence the competence of those individuals. So if the work that they're doing updates or changes the fire safety information, it becomes notifiable works under fire. Well, that requires the SCEB. You need to make sure. So I would say you need to get, if it's not the risk assessor or an FM company, you need to get somebody, it may be a fire consultant, someone who could take you through that whole pathway. Now, if it's a smaller building, it's going to be your risk assessor. You're not going to have, if we're dealing with a multinational, you would go FM, then risk assessor, then competent persons. And if you put all of those three in place, the demonstrable competence will allow you to have a practicable system of maintenance. If you remove the risk assessment or the risk assessor at the heart of it, you're not going to have it. And that doesn't mean just get it. I would say if you've got a risk assessor coming in a building for 400 quid, get rid of them, because they're a waste of your time. And we look at risk assessments, and you will see them where they've got outstanding, they require that. Well, if a risk assessment finds faults, well, it needs another risk assessment, doesn't it? Once that's been closed out. If there's serious actions required, it needs to be closed out. Well, you need to engage with someone who can do that. So I think the key would be have a person, if the risk assessment is the foundation or the middle of it, everything must go through the risk assessor.
Yeah.
If you're not doing that, how could your system of maintenance be in accordance with a risk assessment if the risk assessor doesn't know what you're doing?
Yeah. And it goes back to, and again, I'm probably going back steps here, but many a times, the responsible person, they don't have to be the competent person, but they are the responsible person. If something happens and them box, I hate using this word for this, the boxes haven't been ticked, or the process hasn't been followed properly, maybe that's the right word. Yeah. They're the ones that are going to jail.
Yeah.
So how does a business identify who the responsible person should be? Because many a times we will go to a client meeting, and the responsible person might be the office manager. It might be the accounts manager. It's usually somebody who's just a mechanism, and FM has been handed to them. So how should a business appoint a responsible person? Who should that person be?
But the responsible person, and I think this is one of the key problems that people are not understanding. So you will hear people say the responsible person can be an organisation, and it can be, but there has to be someone accountable. There is someone accountable. So if we look at, for instance, Man City, Sheikh Mansour doesn't get involved in who's doing the fire doors, do they? What there will be is a CEO, and that CEO will be dealing with budgets. So when we look at fire, if you had an incident in one of your buildings and you're running, the Penguin office has a fire, and in the investigation they will say to you, what's your budget per year, Mike, for fire compliance? I ain't got one. Well, you're not going to be able to prove you've got a system in place, then are you? So it would be the person who's in control of those purse strings within that organisation. So
Yeah.
generally the CEO. So when you walk in and it is the office manager, it is because they will be a duty holder for the responsible person. They're reporting to so that's absolutely fine. But from one of the things in the Building Safety Act under Section 156 was in November 2023, it says in Section 156 you have to have the information of the responsible person. So that became a legal requirement
Yep.
in November 2023. We shouldn't be walking into buildings not knowing that. But I would ask then.
But we walk into buildings where there isn't a responsible person.
So if you walk into a building where there isn't a responsible person, but they've got a risk assessment in place, I would be saying, how can we risk assess? Who's your risk assessor? Wrote that too. How could you? Because that risk. When I do a fire safety document, I don't give it to Steve on reception, do I? I send it to the responsible person. Well, I can't do that if you haven't told me who it is. So if the responsible person is required for the duties under fire and the risk assessor hasn't sent it, how have they done it? Well, it's because you've engaged with the wrong person already.
Yeah, no, totally
Because
agree.
I work with the likes of Bernie Higgins, risk assessor. Everything he does is one of the first is who is the responsible person. If you look at the 5 steps I've done under fire compliance, it's asking who's the responsible person. You need to know that's the person who needs to be reported to of your findings.
Yeah, and we'll share them 5 steps. So let's look to the future, Lee.
Yep.
We've talked about the past. We've talked about now. What emerging trends, technologies do you think will shape fire compliance for the future, for the next 5-10 years?
We enter, well, we say we enter, I'm 50, I'm sure other people have entered it before, but we're down the digital age now, aren't we? And we're looking at things like AI and, golden thread is a very big part of it now, of being able to make sure all parts come together. So I think, and I'm probably a late embracer of AI, but absolutely incredible if used in the correct way. But it's very much, if you have the competence, it will allow you to do. But I've watched recently, there's someone who's invented something that he can inspect your doors using AI. But once I actually talked to him, he didn't even know. He was saying, oh yeah, well, I inspect against regulation 10. And I said, well, that's not you don't even understand what you're inspecting against. That's a responsible person's check. You can't sell that to the responsible person as that's a check to be done by a competent person. Can you, and do I think it will get to the stage where you can, I would like to think that there is a time that we can get, but I think it's just that digital age, that, information for the responsible person, where they can get it and it's clear. Lots of my social media is all about getting it out there but having it where someone can then feed it through that model and understand it and tailor it for their own company. And so, I think that's going to be what is moving us forward, where you can understand as the responsible person what you're being told.
Yeah, we go back to that system of works as well, though. So we look at technology, the system of works. How can we use technology, to improve that system of works? And I look at it from a hard FM point of view, that every single asset we maintain, we asset tag. Yeah, and every single time we repair that asset or we service that asset, the engineer will create a job sheet. He will create notes we have values in there of, you know, if a part's been replaced, so that life cycle asset cost.
Yeah.
Do you think the implementation of that kind of technology in the fire door world, because I see it out there, but we're not seeing it a lot?
Yeah, so I work quite heavily with door data systems and they NFC tagging, and it's really useful because especially for the FM world. So a lot of what my work, I could work remotely, so I can get onto people's systems, have a look at inspections, and I may say, yeah, what they're putting in there is not there correct, or we need to have a look at that. We can do regulation 38 sign off. So I think there has to be that. There has to be that digital model of where it allows other people to be able to look into it, where the responsible person can then rely on you as their FM. So Door Data has an FM system. So because the responsible person, I see lots of people who are working on things like Plan Radar and I say it's not golden thread. I had this with Plan Radar and I said, your system's great. It's very much like Snagall and all of these, but the responsible person has to own the golden thread.
Yeah.
Well, if it's the contractor who owns it, it's not golden thread, because once you fall out with them, you've got a data dump.
Yeah.
Golden thread's that linear, only the responsible person, because it's got to be for the life cycle of that responsible person or that organisation.
Yeah.
And I think it's that we are getting, where this sales, people are getting mixed up with digital recording and golden thread. And, you know, things what golden thread would KPI, and you'd be able to see it. So you'd be able to say to your clients, yeah, that building requires the door inspections now, and this is, and what it does, it keeps them within compliance. But they could also say, yeah, well, we don't want to use that contractor we used last time. They upset a few people in the office. Well, it doesn't change, does it? That it comes, you can see this, you know, the inspections from this year, the inspections from last year, all the work's done, the PPMs done by their internal staff can all be logged on it. So it becomes like an MOT, doesn't it? It's just that ongoing, but it's the understanding that just because it's technology, it might not be the right technology.
Yeah.
But if you get the right technology, it will absolutely keep you in compliance, because it will give you all the KPIs. It will allow you to understand. But also, as you're dealing with multinationals, it allows the person in the head office to say, oh, Exeter are not doing, you know, so it's the accountability, doesn't it? It's the transparency.
Yeah.
You're not ringing up to find out whether they've done it. You're looking on a dashboard and saying, why haven't you done that? And that I work with a few schools, and that's been really helpful for accountability of saying, well, that school's not doing that, so why are all the other schools doing it? And you can just, it's very obvious. They can send it over. The dashboard can be sent out. And in your monthly meetings as organisations, when you're sat round and on the whiteboard or, you know, on the projector, you know, if Warwick aren't doing what Newcastle are doing, they won't want to go to many of them monthly meetings where they're not, will they? So I think it drives change, because it becomes transparent who is and who isn't.
Yeah. So I'm going to give you all the power now. Yeah. You're going to be the decision maker. You're going to be the one that's going to change something within the legislation. Yeah. If you could change one thing in the current legislation, or even within the industry, what would it be?
Everything would be regulated. It would be regulated to anybody who works within compliance has to be very, you know, I use things like gas safe. You know who put that boiler in. You know that. You cannot sell within fire compliance unless you have been proven demonstrably competent, and you have to evidence of what you're selling. You can't sell, that clear where if it's misrepresentation, it shows you can't do that. You're held accountable for that. It is, and we are going to, and it'll be like the PPI scandal of the future. We are going to get round to that, and people will be caught. I'm already working on cases where we're catching people.
100%.
I'm working on buildings where they built it, a good few years ago, and I'm saying, well, it was required Reg 38. You haven't supplied any of that. So we are catching them, but a system where we use technology to also make sure that the responsible persons are not being fleeced, the responsible persons are not being we have a regulation of you're on a register. So where we've used things like third-party accreditation, you should be able to go online and check whether I'm competent. It should. When I hear people say, well, it's very hard to prove competency. Well, you've read mine. How can I prove it? I can evidence the competency, whether I'm in foundation, intermediate and advanced, and I could show you the algorithm of how it's been done, all of that. Well, everyone can do it, can't they?
Yeah.
But it's not beneficial for some.
Yeah.
And so I think it's that there is approved registers of inspectors. There is, we can't, you will have heard of people selling, it's a survey, right? So what's the difference between a survey and an inspection? Well, it's a survey under Reg 10. So have you told the client that you're not doing they're legally required under Article 17? Do they know that you're just doing what is essentially a PPM check?
Yeah.
Well, they don't. So it would be that. It would be to get out a list how that everybody is registered. Everybody has to have the insurance. That insurance would be checked against your own insurance. So if you're the responsible person and I say, I've got insurance, and the person that you've got checking me tells me, well, how do they know what insurance? Does my insurance invalidate your insurance?
Yeah.
So that clear thing of you go on a system and you could say, that's the inspector, right? We're going to look at that inspector. We're going to engage with them. We're going to talk to our insurance provider. This is where they are. This is the system that they're on. That's their insurance. And almost a system that you can feed in like that. So we're not working behind third-party schemes. You can evidence that if our company, so if Penguin send 10 people, they can independently look as the responsible person, who are them? They'll say, I'll say to you, Mike, who are your 10 people? Well, we've got these. You'll send them their profile. They can go on and they can check that those people can work in, let's say they've got a high-risk building. They're competent to work in a high-risk building and their insurance covers that. Because lots of people go, they've got liability and indemnity insurance. But I know when I was in construction, because we were an internal bespoke company, we weren't insured to work outside on the scaffold because it's completely different to what the insurance was.
Yeah.
But when you're working for your Galliford Tries Langover, they're checking that, but nobody else is checked. So it's a system, what makes it transparent for the responsible person of who that person is.
Yeah.
If they're not registered, just don't use them. They can say, mine's expired. Whatever their excuse is, just don't use them and pick somebody else.
Yeah.
You tell the company you can't send him because we're not.
Yeah.
That would be using technology to add clarity to people's choices would be.
Yeah. No, that's really good. So, coming to the end, you've got a huge fountain of knowledge, and you know your industry. What book, podcast would you suggest that anybody out there listens to or reads at this moment in time?
So I say this to everyone. People, the obvious answer, what people would look at this, look at legislation, look at it. But the responsible person to understand the gravity of what could happen has got to be Peter App's Show Me the Body, of, the story of Grenfell.
Yeah.
Having a look at the catastrophic failures over a sustained period, what created that. But I'm always loathed because I feel people that use Grenfell in lots of selling. I've heard awful things like people selling things as Grenfell repairs. Like it's the most awful thing that I've ever heard. But to actually understand the gravity of what these things do, of, lots of people look around Grenfell and we look at cladding and we look at, there's lots of argument about, PAS and, whether it's, but it's the whole thing. I think at the moment, there's 19 companies and 58 people being interviewed by the Metropolitan Police. Well, that's not just the people involved in the cladding. Let's look at this. It's the whole thing. It's a systemic failure, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And show me the bodies. I say anybody who's going to open a company in fire compliance, read that book and then imagine that that's your family involved. And I believe that it won't change some, but it will make some people sit back. I watched the Netflix Grenfell, but there was not enough of the truth in it for me.
Right.
I want, there's more to it. If we concentrate on just the cladding, does that make people aware of all the other problems that you need to?
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say that I think what it does, me myself, and I'm not, how my brain and my neurodivergence, I'm not a crier, but I cried in it, and everybody I know has, because I know how bad it is. I talk to people. I'm on I was with Jill Koenig, who does a lot around the survivors, used to live in Grenfell Tower at the UK Construction Task Force. And she delivered a speech for our new task force. And, the importance of saying, don't talk about it, don't work in silos, have the ethics, have the morals, do it properly.
Yeah, which is what I was just about to finish on.
But yeah. do it properly. And the misconception that, oh yeah, well, if I do it this way or I do it that way, it's cheaper. I guarantee more is currently being spent than is required to be spent, because people have jumped onto the belief that if I get a company who work under this third party, I'm compliant. You're not. You're just spending more to end up non-compliant.
Yeah.
And that's where I would understand what it is. Understand. We all know what happens in a fire. We all know that it can result in death. But do we actually understand, if we look at it, if we think about it, that how quick the fire spread, how, are we looking at, we look at fire and we think fire. Do you know what toxic gases do? If your door doesn't shut, do you realise the implications of it? I think is it 84% of people who die in fires is from the inhalation.
Yeah, it's the smoke.
It isn't from.
Yeah.
Well, then if you look at that, how important is your door then?
Yeah.
And it's there is so much of that. They've look and read the books, watch the films, do all of that, because if I look at in this industry that my job is to keep strangers safe.
Yeah.
But I look at them as they're not strangers, because I'm not more important than them.
Yeah.
So my job is to make, and where I sometimes get on my soapbox and I'm very passionate about it, is because we're not, when I worked in construction and I was doing a wall panelling detail, I'm not going to keep anyone, that's just subjective, isn't it? It's building a David Lloyd or doing something like that. That, I liked it, did it, but it wasn't that important, was it? It was just doing something.
But
Whereas compliance is important, but doing it properly, having the competence, because if you're not doing it properly or you haven't got the skills, you will tell someone a prognosis what is not actually legally correct. It will be too expensive, so they will just do nothing.
Yeah.
Where if we get it back to understanding what we're doing, why we're doing it, make it practicable, I don't believe that it's people not wanting to do it. I think there's people not believing they can afford to do it.
Yeah. Confusion.
And whose story do I believe?
Yeah.
Whose story do I believe? If they can't give you the evidence, fact, as I said, belief and fact.
Yeah.
90% are selling on belief. If it's fact and it's legally correct, you'll be able to show me, won't you? The HSE have a saying, don't tell me, show me. And that's what I would sign off. Every responsible person who's being told something, don't tell me, show me, and I will ask my risk assessor.
Yeah. I want to finish on that because I think that's a big statement. Yeah. I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much for emptying your head. And we probably could talk forever. But no, really appreciate everything you've gone through today. Thanks very much.
I appreciate it. I appreciate that you've took the time, and as an employer yourself, you're so driven to get this story out of the honesty, what needs to come to it with fire doors, with fire compliance, the integrity, because there's an easier road for you and all of that to join on the same gravy train. The fact that you're putting this out to your clients shows the ethos that I think that we need lots more of this. That let's not hide away from the truth. Let's absolutely bask in the truth.
Yeah, let's do the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, thanks, Lee.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Cheers.
Welcome to the Penguin Podcast, brought to you by Penguin Facilities Management.